Hello, Reluctant Messenger Unleashed Nation. Welcome to episode 21 as we cover chapter 10, I Dreamed a Dream. I'm your host, Donna Rebadow, and with me is author Candice Sanderson.
Welcome back, everyone. It's great to see you.
Before we start on this episode, let me ask, did you do your homework? Your assignment was to list all the tools we've learned from the messengers during this whole series. And we've decided to add a bonus episode covering all those tools. So hang on to your homework until then. We'll be checking that. We'll be checking you. So now open your books to page 180 as we cover the next to the last chapter of the book. Candy, you start the chapter with a powerful story. It really touched my heart. Please tell us about the dream your mother had. Will you share that with us, please?
Yes, I'll never forget it. I was in college and I'd come home for a long weekend. When I woke up that next morning, my mother had this dream that she told me about. My sister at age 23, Jana, was killed in a car accident a short time before this dream. Jana came to my mother to say Mr. Johnson was with her. Now, that's not his real name, but that's the name I use in the book, and that's the name I'll use here. This man, Mr. Johnson, had been the CEO of the business college my sister had attended. I didn't understand the significance of the dream until the evening paper arrived and I saw Mr. Johnson's obituary. And in that newspaper article, it detailed his sudden passing. Now, I couldn't wrap my head around this. My mother told me her dream hours before the newspaper arrived. This was way back in 1970, long before the internet. Our family didn't know Mr. Johnson or any of his family. It was only my sister Jana who was connected to him. So there was no way that we would have known about his passing. This dream brought me two life-altering lessons. Number one, when my sister welcomed Mr. Johnson to the other side, I learned that we are not alone when we cross into that dimension we call death. And number two, when Jana told my mother of Mr. Johnson's arrival, I learned there is communication after death.
Well, Candy, first of all, I'm really sorry about your sister. I really am. So,
thank you.
Second, this must have been a really eye-opening experience for you, Candy. You weren't a psychologist yet, but you were in college being trained to be one. And I'm guessing your college classes didn't cover after-death communication, right?
Right, you're absolutely right, Donna. Let me give you some context to who I was then. I grew up in Western Kentucky. Now, this area of the country is in the middle of what we call the Bible Belt. Religion was a very significant part of my upbringing. Spirituality was one of those new age ideas that, frankly, I didn't give a lot of thought to. My college courses were leading me away from my religious background and guiding me toward a new religion, science. You see, my training was teaching me what to trust, the material world of the physical, the world of measurement. My classes were teaching me that anything outside of the physical was based on pathology. But Donna, there was this secret side to me that no one knew about. There were things that my science could not explain. I could not mark it up to pathology because I knew better. And who led me to this mysterious side? My mother. Listen to your mother, remember that. She was intuitive. She had what we called in those days ESP, or extrasensory perception. If she said she had a feeling about something, I'd learned, usually the hard way, to respect that feeling. She just knew things that other people did not know. And although I couldn't explain it, I'd learned to respect that intuitive nature that she had. So when my mother told me the dream about Mr. Johnson, this became a pivotal point in my life. I could no longer think of dreams as fantasy or as a chemical release. And although this occurred decades ago, its impact remains with me today. But I didn't know how to reconcile this with my life of science. I continued living in a world defined by materialism, and I was trusting only what I could measure. But something had changed. I finished my training and I became certified as both a clinical psychologist and a year later, a school psychologist. But the doors to the non-physical had cracked just enough to allow me a glimpse into a new truth. I became curious, wondering about a dimension where my physical senses did not operate the way I thought they should operate. I continued to live in this empirical, pragmatic life, at least on the surface. But those experiences with my mother piqued my interest. I couldn't explain them. They didn't fit within that paradigm of life. So I kept them neatly tucked aside until I was ready to see more. But especially from that point on, I continued to be fascinated by dreams. I've kept a dream journal for years, and it's close to being 250,000 words long. Some dreams are precognitive, where I learn of something that hasn't occurred yet. Other dreams are what I now know are visitations or visits, where I'm hanging out with people who have passed. This is not just people. Sometimes it's pets as well, too.
You know, I'm glad we're doing this Unleashed episode because I always wondered about that. I've always heard you say, you know, if it wasn't measurable or part of my senses, I knew it wasn't true, but I knew about your mother's dream and how it had changed you. So that's really very cool, and I thank you for sharing that with us. But I wanted to know, if it's 250,000 words long, when did you start your dream journal?
I think my dream journal must have started as a New Year's resolution, because my first official entry, and you know how those resolutions go, they're great for the first week and you forget them.
Exactly.
But my first entry was January 9th, 1998. Now, there were some dreams that I remembered from before, like way back in 1978. And I jotted them down because they were so significant. But I formally started the journal in January of 1998.
That's really cool because that was way before what happened to you in 2013. So I love that. And then you were talking about your precognitive dream. Do you want to talk about that, about the test that you had? So I thought that was really interesting that you remembered that precognitive dream about, you know, they were making you take a test before you, you know, you're going, I'm about to retire. What are you doing? So
yeah, I had this dream, and in the dream, I'm taking a test, and I was so uncomfortable. And as I took the test, I remember saying to the person next to me in the dream, this is crazy. I'm not doing this. I'm too close to retirement to have to think about taking tests again. So when I got to work that day, it was an interesting day because we were all scheduled to have some sort of an in-service meeting. Yeah. I know we had all these experts that were coming in to speak with us. So it was great. I got to the administrative center early and was chatting with everyone. And as soon as we sat down and we were ready to start the meeting, the instructor started passing out Scantron sheets. And I thought, oh my gosh, Donna, you remember Scantron sheets. That can only mean one thing. We were going to have a test. They were giving us what's called a pre-test. So they were testing our knowledge of the subject that they would be covering before we covered it. So they wanted to know what the baseline was. What did we know? And then at the end, we would have a post-test to see how much we learned. But I turned to the lady next to me, another psychologist, and I said, I am too close to retirement to even think about taking a test now. And only then did I realize that was exactly what had happened in my dream. It was just a snippet, but it was a perfect example showing me that what I was going to experience, I had already experienced in the dream state.
Yeah, though, so that precognitive dream was really had you freaking out. But that dream journal we're talking about came in handy, didn't it? So if everyone goes to page 182, and we're going to look at her talking about in December of 2013. It was December, and you had just 4 months of channeling. And what was interesting is so in December, they started asking you about a dream that you had 10 years before. So on page 183, we can read that. We can read about that message, but that's the backdrop. So you had this dream, you had a journal, you had written what you thought it was like, but the messengers came in and said, we want you to think about that dream again. We think that you are ready for a different interpretation.
Absolutely. And at that point, I was so glad that I had started my dream journal back in 1998. And I was so glad that it wasn't handwritten. I've got it in a Word document. So I just use that search feature, and it's like you put that in and the dream pops up. The messengers are telling me to go back and review this dream from 2003. Donna, I still remember that dream right now. The only thing I didn't remember was the date. But I am standing on this football field that is suspended in deep space. There are 8 or 9 small groups of people that are dotting the landscape, and we're all learning to fly. My instructor was teaching me what I call a float and guide technique. So in a superwoman style position, I'd lift about 4 or 5 feet off the ground. Yeah. And after I got comfortable with this height, I slowly glided across the field. But there was a problem. No matter how hard I tried, I lost altitude as I got to the edge of the platform near that dark abyss of interstellar space. I would turn around, and as I would glide toward the safety of the center of the field, I could easily resume that previous elevation. Now, I don't usually interpret my dreams. As a psychologist, people might think that I do that, but to me, back in 2003, this seemed easy enough to interpret. I had thought that this dream was symbolic, telling me that I need to face my fears and I needed to learn to trust in myself. That made perfect sense to me at the time. The dream about learning to fly like Superwoman now had a new interpretation. It wasn't just me trying to overcome fear. The messengers were telling me that I was actually practicing thought-generated travel, whether I've transitioned or whether I'm in the dream state or whether I'm just meditating. It would allow me to have this practice in order to expand and travel wherever I needed to.
Candy, you know that I'm an actual pilot. I mean, I pilot in the 3D, so I can understand about that fear. But Tom Campbell also has me starting out my OBEs with imagining that I'm flying, so there must be something really interesting about that. But wow. 10 years later, the messengers told you to interpret it a little bit different. They're going to change your POE. It's not that you didn't interpret it correctly, but there was another perspective. And we spent the whole chapter on changing perspectives with this message. And they gave you this different point of view, this different overview. So in the second paragraph of the message, and we're on page 183, the next paragraph says, "This dream is preparing this one," meaning you, "to travel in other dimensions." I thought that was cool. "Her energy body will be ready for flight. All she needed to do was smile and breathe from the heart space, and she will be travel worthy." Man, were they giving you lessons with traveling with your energy body? What you have to do is practice. What do you think about that whole thing, Candy?
Well, first of all, Donna, I was fascinated, and it just brought up a slew of questions. Had the messengers been responsible for that dream way back in 2003? Had they been around me all these years and I just didn't know it? Maybe I wasn't ready for it then. I use a quote in the book that I absolutely love. It's from Albert Einstein. He says, as the area of light expands, so does the perimeter of darkness. That explains why the more I know, the less I know. Knowing opens up more room for exploration. But I really wanted to know more about who was sending this message. They must know me well to be able to go back to dreams over a decade ago. So the message continued, and we go to the next page, page 184, and they start philosophizing. They say when the traveler is ready, the path of light will be illuminated. It's their version of what we say when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. But the message goes on to say that is why they're called guides. They guide us. And as the channel widens, there's going to be more connections to other energy groups. This spontaneously brought me back to a very significant dream for me. Remember, I said my dream journal started in 1998?
Yeah.
But I wrote some dreams down before that date. I didn't have the specific date they occurred, but the ones that were significant to me. This was one of them. It was back in the 1990s. And this group of about 40 people stood in front of me. It was like a half circle. Yeah. And all of them seemed familiar, but I didn't recognize any of them. And this older man stepped forward and he said, quote, "We are part of your soul group." Well, at that time, I had never even heard of a soul group. Yeah. And that's one reason why this dream was so memorable. And as I wondered as that dream came up, I thought, maybe it was this soul group that had helped me with these connections. And another segment of the message came in, and they said they were from a specific energy system that works with dreaming energies, and that there are multiple groups that work with specific vibrations so they can work on things like dream recall, dream interpretation, and communication within dreams. A few days later, I had another message that answered some of the earlier questions. We're on page 185. At the top of the page, the December 19th, 2013 message. The dream says that the messengers were responsible for my dream journal. That they were the ones who had encouraged me to start this journal years ago. And here I thought it was me deciding to follow through on a New Year's resolution. Now when the messengers ask me to review a dream, I'm just so happy. I don't have to rely on my memory. I just have to type in a topic and a few keystrokes later, there it is. But this told me two things. The messengers have been around much longer than I had realized, and they were giving me guidance. But what's equally important, I realized I had been following their guidance, even though I didn't know it.
Well, that brings up a few questions, Candy. So I want to ask you first, did you find out who those 40 people who was in your soul group? And I remember Paul Elder saying he knew some of the people and he actually ran into them in the 3D. So have you run into anybody in the 3D?
Yes. That's a fascinating question, Donna. I have friends who I know are in my soul group. You're one of them. There's this connection. Donna, when we first met, we immediately connected. You've always said that you think that we're twins, and it's like, yeah, we can read each other's thoughts. So of course we're in the same soul group. My husband was definitely in my soul group, but there have been people that I have met for just moments. And I realized too that they're part of my soul group. One is a woman who sat next to me on a flight. One was the lady who sold me my first cell phone. I could go on and on, where you have this very brief interaction with someone, but it's so significant and you can't let it go. And you realize they came into your life at that moment.
Wow.
And they were supposed to.
Yeah.
And they weren't supposed to stay in your life. They were supposed to impart knowledge or whatever and then move on. They're part of the group that you travel with life after life.
That's so fascinating to me. Another thing that you said previous to that was about our guidance. And what's fascinating to me is that people can be fooled into thinking we can ignore that because it sounds so much like our own voice in our head. So you got to be careful of that. And is that why you think it took you so long to recognize your messengers?
Yes.
Okay.
The voice from our guides often sound like us, Donna. So it's natural to think that you're making this up. After all, it's usually your vocabulary, your phrasing. But when I received that flower message in August 2013, they did not use my words. And that's what made me take notice. I couldn't dismiss it thinking that it was me who made up the message. I knew I was not the author.
So it kind of begs the question or the thought of it's really important to watch your thoughts, to be constantly aware of them. And that's, I think, when people say I'm becoming aware. And I do that all the time now. And it's like, I do ask who's doing the speaking. A lot of times you might not get the answer. So then you go, okay, what's that guidance? Is that something I think I should follow? And many times you followed your own guidance and followed that little voice in your head. And that's true of a lot of us. Another thing is, too, what people say is, I got the gut intuition. And we often said, and I think you've said it here, the gut is our second brain. So this is really important for us to look at this guidance into where it might come in as your own thought. And you think, I should do a dream journal. Or it could be such an outstanding, okay, look, we gave you that sign and you didn't pay attention, so now we're going to use different vocabulary and shake you up. So those were really important thoughts. But Candy, let's look how the message ends, because you said the message says dreaming serves multiple purposes. Tell us more about that, please.
Well, Donna, the message really validated what I had known or learned to be true because I had experienced it. Remember back in chapter 3, Father Time, we talked about energy packets.
Yes.
We learned that there is a structure like a cumulus cloud, and these energy packets exist within that structure. And they float around, and these packets of energy are a potential. And they're just waiting for our desires, our intentions, our thoughts to instruct them to manifest. So they're always shifting around, waiting for us to set that pattern through an intention or a desire. Well, this message talks about those energy packets again. These are the energy packets of low vibrational energy resulting from stress or anger or discord, things that occur during the waking state that hurt us or make our blood pressure rise. Those energies too are stored in these packets. Everything is, but we release them during our sleep. We release all the packets of the day, but if we mainly have low-lying energy to release, you know what results? Nightmares.
Yeah.
But if we've had a great day filled with love and gratitude and good feelings, then when we release them, it's as if our energies continue to uplift us. That is when we find us more lucid in other dimensional spaces, like our dreams. These are the times that we would have a dream with a light being or with angels, or maybe visitations from loved ones who have passed.
And that's really cool. And again, a tool is to watch our thoughts, because this really speaks of I know a lot of times for me, Donna, during the day, I go, don't take it personally, don't take it personally, don't take it personally. And then I'll say, sometime during the day, I'll say, I'm magnificent. I am a magnificent, beautiful light being. So I'm really doing that consciously. And before I fall asleep, I say, my dreams will be filled with lightness and love. And I open up my heart space So that's a really important tool. Also, it reminded me of all the dream theories that I used to teach my students during Psych 101. We had a chapter on consciousness. So I think it's funny I'm doing a podcast called Exploring Consciousness. But there's an entire chapter devoted to that. And within the chapter, we cover sleep, dreams, hypnosis, and drugs under consciousness. What a chapter, right? So, but I love what your messengers shared here about how dreams have multiple purposes. And I also like we have different soul groups overseeing our dreams. People overseeing our dreams. How cool is that? I just love this chapter. And Candy, over the next few pages, beginning on let's go to page 186. So you do a lot here. You do a lot with dreams. So you give us 3 messages about dreaming, and all these dreams occurred in January 2014. What prompted these messages was a dream that you had. So that's really important. So tell us about that and how it related.
Yes, in this dream, I was staying overnight at someone's house. When I got up from the bedroom to go into the hallway, I felt this shift of energy. And it wasn't subtle. It was so intense that I convinced all these other people in the house to come with me. I'd say, come here, you've got to feel this. So I had everyone walking back and forth between my room and the hallway. Everybody felt it, and everybody had their own opinion on what it was or what it meant, but nobody could really explain it. Now, the next morning, which was January 8th, 2014, the first message arrived. It was about energy shifts, and it was explaining why I could feel it during the dream state. As I glanced at this first paragraph of the message, it says, everything is energy. When humans are dreaming, they operate from a point of reference, which would be your POE, outside their physical bodies. Becoming aware of the dream state allows the energy bodies, not the physical bodies, to operate. Humans call this lucid dreaming. Well, this caught my attention for several reasons. First of all, when they said operating from a point of reference outside their physical bodies, the wording. Donna, we're bringing back your friend, that dot that you love, the POE, the point of existence. So let's unleash this. Why didn't they just say when your POE is in your energy field instead of your body, isolated as a dot in your body? I can only guess that this messenger is not the same messenger who shared chapter 3, Father Time, and chapter 4, Changing Perspectives.
Just like, oh my gosh, the realization that you knew that it wasn't the same messenger because of the knowledge and the wording. I thought that was really cool.
And I didn't even get that till right now as I'm reviewing this. And that's neither here nor there, but I just thought it was interesting that the messengers too bring their own perspectives, and they don't necessarily share the same language to describe similar concepts. So back to the message about the dream. The third paragraph says that I'll be able to do what I did in the dream. I'll be able to discern shifts in energy during my waking hours. So it seems that this dream was preparing me once again for future tasks. Just like that flying dream was teaching me thought-generated travel for when I'm totally in the non-physical, this dream offered practice for later in 3D living.
So I'm a huge lucid dreamer, and I try to stay in what they call the hypnagogic state for as long as I can each night. So listeners can go look up lucid dreaming. There's books, there's people that teach it. But there's a huge correlation between dreams, lucid dreaming, and meditation. But I could talk about this all night. I'm not going to do that. I also contemplate the physics concepts that energy is never destroyed. That's big for me. Energy is never destroyed. Everything is energy. You keep saying that. So what's interesting is I'm currently listening to a Dr. Edgar Mitchell talk at the Monroe Institute on his travels about being an astronaut. He talks about consciousness, holograms, and the nature of reality. I have to keep listening to it over and over because it's so much information. And Mark Serto put it up on his Triad Mind Facebook group. But this whole paragraph got me to thinking about this whole thing. And I wondered, what messenger put that in my head? The messengers talk about energy leaving its imprint on the environment, whether it's joyful or negative. I found that intriguing. Can you unpack that? Can you unleash that part?
When I first moved to Naples, when I would drive to work, I noticed that I would get teary-eyed when I reached a certain place on the road, a certain place in my commute. I started taking closer notice. It was always the same place. The hair on the back of my neck would stand up. Tears would fill my eyes. It was so sad. I finally did some investigation, and I learned that years before, this was where there was a fatal accident and a child had died. The imprint of that accident remained, and I picked up on it every time I passed it. The same is true also for places of joy. When I return to Monroe Institute, I feel the energy of all of the participants, including you and me, who've been there before. It's their collective energy that adds to the magic of the campus.
You know, that's interesting, Candy. And we often hear stories about people seeing Civil War spirits close to the battleground. It's that same energy imprint that remains behind. That's interesting. Let's go to the next dream on January 28th, 2014 on page 187. And you learn about the different classification of dreams. So this is different than what I would teach in class. This is so totally different. You've been having instructional dreams, but they were ready to introduce precognitive dreams where you foresee the future. What's interesting is they gave you an example about a dream about bunnies. Really? Not only that, but right after the dream, someone gave you some toys for Lorelei, your grandchild. Guess what? Rabbits. What was that all about?
It's funny, Donna. The previous week, I had this wonderful dream. It was so vivid. I am lying on a quilt on a hillside meadow, and it's just filled with wildflowers. And I'm looking up at the sky, and these beautiful white, fluffy clouds are just flying by. And all of a sudden, these little bunny rabbits are jumping on me. They're crossing the field. I was in the middle of a bunny migration. I still remember the dream. I started laughing in my dream. I could just feel the weight of their little furry feet as they hopped on my body. It was, in fact, I think my laughing is what woke me up. But a couple days later, a friend of mine gave me some gifts for Lorelei. And you guessed it, rabbits. One was a porcelain statue, and then there were 2 stuffed toys of rabbits. The meaningful part was a precognitive dream. I had been overwhelmed with rabbits in the dream, followed by rabbits in my 3D life. And I've had so many precognitive dreams. Some of them manifested just a short time later, so it was easy to remember. Others, though, might not manifest for weeks or months later. And this is when the dream journal really came in handy. It was so easy to track. Now, on page 188, the messengers state in that first paragraph of the message, events are offered to humans via the dream state prior to manifestation in the earth plane. The messengers say the interface between the dimensions is where the dream seeds or dreamers collect and recognize these not yet manifested energies. They say that dreamers, dream seeds, are a subset of light workers. We've talked about light workers before. But these dreamers are charged with helping others be more lucid in their dreams. So here's a couple of new terms for me: dreamers or dream seeds. I was so curious about that. And like clockwork, the answers came the next day. I'd gotten home from work, changed my clothes, went out on the beach for a walk when the message came in. And they use that flower analogy. Just as a planted seed will expand upward through the soil, the dream seed begins in the interface. Just as the soil is like an interface before the plant pierces through the ground to reach the next dimension, air, the interface is where the dreams begin to form before they manifest in the next dimension, 3D reality. The message says that as I continue to develop my role as dream seed, that veil, that interface between the dimensional spaces will become more accessible. They say the work the messengers do with us during our dreams affect our waking states, but most of the time we're just not aware of that. So this message, especially with the analogy of the dream seed and the flower becoming the flower of energy, I loved it. And they ended the message by saying this on page 189 at the bottom of the page. And now the dream seed and the flower of information have come full circle.
You know, I love circles. I know how this circles back to the beginning, that flower, the flower from the first message. It really ties it all together. But there's one more dream in this January 2014 series of messages. So let's go to page 190. So we're going to go to the January 31st dream. It references that the dream from the night before. In fact, as you're sitting at the computer to type your dream journal, the message came in. I love that. Multidimensional, multitasking. So the message explains more about that interface and how it works. It's a training ground during the dream state. They say that some people, like my friend Marla, psychic mediums, can maintain their awareness during that interface. And others can do it through meditation. It seems to be a matter of degrees or who you are or what your skills are. For example, someone who channels by going into a trance does so because they have maybe some more substantial connections in the interface. It's like their POE is deeper in other dimensions. And this message says in paragraph 4, so go ahead and go to paragraph 4. It says, interface connections are growing stronger as Mother Earth transitions to the next dimension. This is not a new message, Candy. We've seen it time and time again. The messengers are telling you about changes that are occurring. As part of the Earth's evolution, people will become more psychic, more aware. They'll be able to receive these messages that the veil is thinning. And then the messengers then tell us a little bit more about your classes. You have had instructional dreams, and they seem to be part of an entry level. So kind of like the difference between my Psych 101, my freshman, or what I taught on the graduate level. So this seems to be part of that Psych 101 or the entry level. But they say you've graduated from 101 and you're probably now master's level or graduate level, which they call the sleepers class. So it's different from when I put my students to sleep in class. It's a little different. So after graduating from the sleepers class, you entered the dream seed class. So it's talking about the little different levels that you can go through. Like in judo, you can go from white to green to blue, and I'm on the brown level. But you enter the dream state class. That's where you learn on page 191. Setting intentions in a dream will result in observable manifestations through energy exchanges. That is so cool. I thought it was very interesting. Class is about dreaming while dreaming. Seriously? You really got to be a graduate level to do that. Fascinating. But the next month you had another dream. It's crazy. Now this is the bird trapped in your house. I just can't believe that. Can you share that with us? What was going on with the bird trapped in your house?
Right. This was another dream seed lesson. And when I woke up the next morning, the classroom lecture began. First the experience and then the debrief to explain the results. This was becoming a pattern. But the dream, briefly, there was this bird caught in my house. It was trying to escape. When he tried to fly out the window, the screen was closed. So he was stuck on the screen. I didn't want him to come back in the house. So what I did is I closed the window. So that had him between the window and the screen. He was in the interface, trapped between the pane of the window and the screen. Now, in the dream, I reached through, yes, through the glass pane to open the screen, and I freed him. There was another dream that night too, and it didn't seem to be related to this one, but I was in a museum type building, and they had a gallery with just hundreds and hundreds of these beautiful crystals. And these crystals, some of them were clusters, some were individual, but they were different colors than anything that I've ever seen on Earth. As soon as I woke up the next morning, the messengers were ready with the rest of the lesson. They said these two dreams were part of the review process. So apparently that's a common aspect of the dream seed class is reviewing. But there were a couple takeaways from the dream with the trap bird. First, they said it's not possible to reach through solid states like windows in 3D reality, but that is common practice in their dimension. I mean, I guess if I'd given it some thought, I would have known that, but having them actually point that out just put this smile on my face. I thought, oh, that is just so cool. That's why we can do things in dreams that we don't do in physical reality, and we don't question it when it happens either. But second, that space between where the bird was trapped between the window and the screen, that represented the interface. That was the state between the dimensions. For the bird, it was somewhat trapped and somewhat free, but actually neither. It was not quite outside, yet it wasn't in my apartment. And the messenger had said that that interface connects two dimensions, and that the connection allowed for energies to open doors to the next dimension. It's not automatic. You're just in a space where you can do that. So not only does the interface connect you, once you're in that space, then you're able to connect even farther. That reminds me of these decompression chambers that we see in movies, whether it's a spacewalk or you're at the bottom of the ocean in a submarine. But once our hero returns from their adventure, they have to enter a neutral zone. Once there, the doors to the outside close, yet the inside doors haven't opened yet. They are in the interface. Once they've decompressed, once they're used to the new energy, then they're allowed to enter the other dimensional space. I thought, perfect example. I loved what they were showing me. The second dream with the crystals, well, if we skip ahead to page 193, the messengers say that objects in their dimension appear different than what we see. Why? Because the original is in their dimension. What we have on Earth is, quote, but a shadow of the original. That explains why the colors of the crystals that I saw in my dream, which was an interface connection, were colors I had never seen before. Those colors don't exist in our dimension, Donna, only theirs. The messengers also on this page talk about crystals and how important they are. They say the energy of crystals help raise the vibration in their surroundings. They even talk about a large crystal at the center of Earth.
Yeah, crystals really are important to you and I, and they have been for a while. And recently they've discovered in a cave in Brazil these huge, huge crystals, and people can't stay around them very long because of the vibration, because it'll throw off your equilibrium. People will get vertigo because it's such high frequency. And What's interesting is and I've talked about this before. Remember, Candy, when I'm talking about the crystals in our body, especially the pineal gland crystals? So I love these messages, and I love that interface. And you did a really nice job with the examples about what that interface really is. So you, of course, did one with plants. And then I thought, okay, you did one with science, one that I liked. So, you've done your own unleashing as the messages arrived. So tell us about the research on the crystals that are at the core of the earth.
Well, of course, I did my own research, and I found that there were these scientists that have theorized that the center of Earth is a crystalline structure. And in the book, I talk about an article written in Science magazine, which is one of the top academic journals from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. But this is something I love about the messages. They give me something that challenges my beliefs until I later research it and find out that these surprising discoveries aren't that surprising at all. They are commonplace in some circles, just not mine. But these are the things that one by one moved me along that line from skeptic to believer, and then from believer to knower. It's that independent validations. Those are just so powerful. The messengers also suggested that I represented the trapped bird, as well as the one who set it free by reaching through the window pane. When the bird was free of the interface, it was able to fully access the other dimension. It had returned to source. It had returned home. They said that I had been in their dimension many times. Well, Donna, we all have. But when I started the Dream Seed class, I was learning to maintain conscious awareness in their dimension.
So I love the metaphors here, because the trapped bird, it's a bird that can fly. And let's go back to your flying dream and go back to what you were experiencing there. So, and as you were able to fly more and more, the more you know. And that really has been your journey, hasn't it? So the metaphor in the dream is you. It became you, and they're telling you this was you. So the more you know, the more you're pushing those boundaries. So you also talked about entering trance states while channeling. So I follow Edgar Casey, and he enters a trance state before he channels. So if people wanted to know more about that, that just fascinates me. I can't think of a more perfect way to end this episode. I want to thank you, Candy, for sharing with us. I want to thank the listeners for joining us as we unleash the stories behind the reluctant messenger. On the next episode, we'll wrap up Chapter 10, I Dreamed a Dream. In the meantime, your homework is to journal your dreams. If you haven't started, your homework is to start. If you have started, it's to continue, to make a commitment. And once you do that, your dream recall will improve. So don't forget that homework.
And I want to thank you, everyone, and thank you, Donna, too. I invite you to like the episode, subscribe, leave comments, share our channel on your social media. But remember, be kind to one another. So until next time.